Welcome to Darkness Falls. I'm your host Adnan. This is episode 7, the Mary Celeste. The structure of the ship Mary Celeste was laid in late 1860 at a shipyard in the village of Spencer's Island, on the shores of the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. The ship was constructed of locally felled timber with 2 masts and was rigged as a brigantine. She was given the name Amazon and was launched on May 18, 1861. She was owned by a local consortium of 9 people. Among the co-owners was Robert McClellan, the ship's first captain. For her maiden voyage in June 1861, Amazon sailed to 5 islands to take on a cargo of timber for passage across the Atlantic to London. After supervising the ship's loading, Captain McClellan fell ill. His condition worsened as time went on. The Amazon returned to Spencer's Island where McClellan died on June 19. John Parker took over as a captain and resumed the voyage to London, in the course of which Amazon encountered further misadventures. She collided with fishing equipment in the Narrows of Eastport, Maine, and after leaving London ran into and sank a ship in the English Channel. Parker remained in command for 2 years, during which Amazon worked mainly in the West Indies trade. In 1863, Parker was succeeded by William Thompson, who remained in command until 1867. Those years were uneventful and the ship didn't go through any major trouble. In October 1867, at Cape Breton Island, Amazon was driven ashore in a storm and was so badly damaged that her owners abandoned her as a wreck. On October 15, she was acquired as a derelict by Alexander McBean of Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. Within a month, McBean sold the wreck to a local businessman who in November 1868 sold it to Richard Haynes, an American mariner from New York. Haynes paid $1,750 for the wreck and then spent around $8,000 restoring it. He made himself her captain and in December 1868 registered her with the Collector of Customs in New York as an American vessel, under a new name, Mary Celeste. In October 1869, the ship was seized by Haynes' creditors and was sold to a New York consortium headed by James H. Winchester. During the next 3 years, the composition of this consortium changed several times, although Winchester retained at least half share throughout. Early in 1878, the ship underwent a major refit, costing $10,000, which enlarged her considerably. The tonnage of the ship increased and a new deck was added. The consortium was made up of Winchester with 6 shares and 2 minor investors with 1 share apiece, with the remaining 4 of 12 shares held by the ship's new captain, Benjamin Spooner Briggs. Briggs was born in Massachusetts and was the son of a sea captain. In 1862, he married Sarah Elizabeth Cobb and together they had 2 children, a son Arthur and daughter Sophia. Captain Briggs was a well-known and respectable sea captain. By the time Sophia was born, Briggs wanted to retire as he was tired of the wandering life and wanted to go into business. Instead, he invested his savings in a share of a ship, the Mary Celeste. In October 1872, Benjamin Briggs took command of Mary Celeste for her first voyage following extensive New York refit, which was to take her to Genoa in Italy. He arranged for his wife and infant daughter to accompany him, while his school-aged son was left home with his grandmother. Briggs had chosen his crew carefully. Most of them either previously worked for him or was personally known by the ship's owner Winchester. According to testimonies, the seamen were known as respectable and first-class sailors. More than 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol was loaded to the ship for its voyage to Italy. On November 7, 1872, Mary Celeste set sail from New York harbor on its way to Genoa, Italy. On board were the captain, Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, along with 7 crew members. Over the next 2 weeks, the ship encountered harsh weather. According to the last log entry, dated November 25, the Mary Celeste was some 6 nautical miles from the Azores, a group of Portuguese islands. On 5 December 1872, about 400 miles east of the Azores, the British merchant ship Dei Gratia made an eerie discovery. The crew alerted the captain, David Morehouse, to the presence of another sailing ship. The ship was sailing in a strange manner. The ship's erratic movements and the odd set of her sails led Morehouse to suspect that something was wrong. As the vessel drew close, he could see nobody on deck and he received no reply to his signals, so he sent his men on a sea boat to investigate. His men established that the ship was Mary Celeste by the name on the stern. They found the ship to be deserted. The ship was in disarray even though there were no signs of violence. The sails were poorly set and in a bad condition. The rigging was damaged and the ropes hanging over the side. The clock and compass were broken. One of her pumps had been dismantled. Her lifeboat was missing and the 6-month supply of food and water was untouched. There was a lot of water between the decks and 3.5 feet of water in the hold, which wasn't really concerning for a ship of its size. A makeshift sounding rod, which is a device for measuring the amount of water in the hold, was found abandoned on deck. Adding to the mystery was the fact that the cargo and personal belongings were largely undisturbed. Some of the alcohol barrels were empty, and some navigational instruments and documents were also missing. They found the ship's daily log in the mate's cabin, and its final entry was dated at 8 a.m. on November 25, 9 days earlier. It recorded Mary Celeste's position then as just off Santa Maria Islands in the Azores. The evidence on the ship suggested a quick abandonment. Even though the ship was messy, it was still in good enough condition to sail and was by no means sinking. Under maritime law, anyone salvaging a ship could expect a substantial share of the combined value of the rescued vessel and cargo. Morehouse decided to split the crew between the 2 ships and proceed to Gibraltar. It was slow going and both ships were in port by December 12, 1872. On December 17, 1872, the salvage hearings began. The hearing was conducted by the Attorney General of Gibraltar, Frederick Solly Flood. He was known to be an arrogant man. From the beginning, Flood was hellbent on the idea that foul play had taken place. He ordered the thorough examination of the ship. His investigators found possible traces of blood on the captain's sword and noticed cuts on the bow probably caused by a sharp instrument. Another investigator reported that there was no evidence of a collision. A further inspection also led the investigators in believing that the theory of foul play was in fact true. These reports increased the Attorney General's suspicion that the disappearance of the ship's inhabitants was due to human wrongdoing. On January 22, 1873, he sent the reports to the Board of Trade in London, adding his own conclusion that the crew had got the alcohol and murdered Briggs' family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. They had cut the bows to simulate a collision, then fled in the yawl to suffer an unknown fate. Flood thought that Morehouse and his men were hiding something, specifically that Mary Celeste had been abandoned in more easterly location and that the log had been doctored. He could not accept that Mary Celeste could have traveled so far without a crew. On January 15, James Winchester, the majority shareholder of Mary Celeste, arrived in Gibraltar to inquire when Mary Celeste might be released to deliver her cargo. He eventually got to know that the Attorney General suspected foul play by the crew, and Flood also demanded a surety of $15,000 in order to release the ship. There was a sharp exchange of words between Flood and Winchester, as Winchester insisted that Captain Briggs wouldn't have abandoned his ship without a serious fight. Flood's theory of mutiny and murder received significant setbacks when scientific analysis of the stains found in the sword and elsewhere on the ship showed that they were not blood. A second blow to Flood followed in a report commissioned by the American consul in Gibraltar and from a captain of the US Navy. In the captain's view, the marks on the bow were not man-made, but came from natural actions of the sea on the ship's timber. There were no concrete evidence supporting Flood's theory of foul play, and thus Mary Celeste was released from the court's jurisdiction on February 25. 2 weeks later, with a locally raised crew headed by Captain George Blatchford from Massachusetts, she left Gibraltar for Genoa for the delivery of the cargo of alcohol. The salvage payments awarded to Morehouse and his crew was minimal. The amount was way less than expected amount, as it took a lot of hard work and risk to bring Mary Celeste to Gibraltar. The payment was low mostly due to Flood's suspicion of Morehouse. The riddle of the Mary Celeste has intrigued and mystified people ever since, with numerous competing theories on what happened to Briggs and the other people on board. First theory about a crazed mutiny on ship was ruled out later due to the fact that the bloods weren't bloodstains. The marks were due to natural wear and tear, and the alcohol was industrial grade stuff that wasn't fit for drinking. Another theory was that Mary Celeste had been a victim of pirates. Could North African pirates have attacked the ship and killed the crew? But this theory didn't have any strong ground, as valuables were not taken from the ship. The cargo was mostly full and the crew had items of good value. It didn't make sense that the pirates would attack Mary Celeste, kill the crew, but leave the valuables behind. There was also no sign of violence on the deck. Many people still have a sneaking suspicion that the crew was abducted by aliens. This theory was generated mostly because of the fact that Mary Celeste was found in a decent condition. The items of the crew wasn't moved around and it seemed that they vanished in thin air. Mysterious lights in the sky were often reported by crews traveling through the Atlantic. There have also been theories about sea monsters and a giant squid. A natural phenomena could have been responsible according to many people. A powerful waterspout could have swept everyone overboard. It could also explain the water found in the cabins and the hold. Perhaps the most plausible theory is that the 9 empty barrels of alcohol had leaked, thus spilling alcohol and possibly creating a fire or explosion. The theory goes on to say that perhaps the captain and crew evacuated to the lifeboat and towed themselves behind the Mary Celeste in observation with the intent of waiting to see if the entire ship would explode. At some point during this observation, they became separated from the Mary Celeste and ultimately were lost at sea and perished. Lending credibility to this suggestion was the fact that there were 9 empty alcohol barrels. Coincidentally, those were constructed of red oak instead of white oak like the others. Today we know red oak is more porous and more likely to emit vapor. This would have allowed alcohol vapor to collect in the hold. Any spark event caused by friction of the barrels rubbing together would have acted as a catalyst for an explosion. Though the ship was found not destroyed, it is thought that the crew was perhaps more concerned about the threat of explosion given the leaky barrels and decided to abandon the ship. It is speculated that Captain Briggs ordered the hold to be opened to inspect the cargo. Upon opening the hold, a violent rush of fumes and steam blew out. Believing his ship was about to explode, Briggs ordered everyone into the lifeboat with instructions to follow the Mary Celeste on a tow line. Only the line was perhaps not secured well, and the next set of harsh sea conditions, it was separated from the Mary Celeste. The captain and crew would have died from hunger, thirst, or exposure. Of course, the major flaw in this theory is the fact that the main hold was found locked and secured by the crew of the Dei Gratia. Handlers who unloaded the barrels of alcohol later did not report smelling any vapors or fumes. Lastly, there were no traces of the alcohol from the 9 empty barrels, and what happened to the alcohols is just as much as a mystery as what happened to the crew. In truth, we'll likely never know what happened to the 10 people who vanished in the North Atlantic sometime between November 24 and December 4, 1872. The available facts are too few, the possibilities nearly limitless. The idea that Mary Celeste was cursed gained more traction in her final years of voyage. In February 1879, she was reported at the island of St. Helena, where she had called to seek medical assistance for her captain Edgar, who had fallen ill. Edgar died on the island, encouraging the idea the ship was indeed cursed. He was her third captain to die prematurely. In January of 1885, she was deliberately wrecked on a coral reef off the coast of Haiti. Her captain Gilman Parker had conspired with a group of Boston shippers to commit insurance fraud. Parker, along with several crooked shippers, tried to scam the insurance company that insured the Mary Celeste. Filling the ship with worthless cargo, they forged the manifest, claiming a value of $30,000, which is $800,000 in today's money. A month later, Parker set sail for Haiti. As the Mary Celeste approached the port, Parker deliberately steered the ship into a well-known reef. The collision ripped the keel apart, wrecking the ship. The crew abandoned the ship, and Parker proceeded to file a claim for the doctored value of the cargo. In 1885, the insurance company investigated and discovered the overinsured cargo. Later that year, Parker and his co-conspirators were charged with fraud. Parker faced an additional charge as well. Parker's trial ended in a mistrial, but the damage to his reputation was total. He died a broken man 3 months later. As for the Mary Celeste herself, her wreck was never recovered. Over the next century, the wood timbers were overgrown by the very reef where she ran aground. In 2001, an expedition claimed to have discovered partial remains, but that has never been definitive. Thank you for listening to Darkness Falls. Please subscribe and share this episode. You can keep an eye on Darkness Falls podcast on YouTube and Facebook for future episodes. You can also follow Darkness Falls Pod on Instagram. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.